Hello, everyone. It is so good to be with you today. This is Ralston Hernandez.
And my name is Giovanni Panginda. You can call me Gio. And welcome to the FYI on Youth Ministry, a podcast from the Fuller Youth Institute.
We have a very special episode for you today. We are in between seasons, but we know it's been a very hard year, a hard few years, couple of years.
Yeah, it's been rough. We had to get tough, and we've lived it. We felt it. We're tired.
There are so many things that have added to the stress and the feeling of burnout and the pressure of ministry. We really want to acknowledge that in this episode and also to give you encouragement because we know that you're doing wonderful things in the midst of all this, and we want to acknowledge that as well. This whole episode is kind of like a shout out to youth leaders.
Yeah, and in fact, in our FYI team, we have several youth leaders and youth workers, so you know they're journeying this life with you. And to be honest, you've gone above and beyond this year, so let these next few moments be a time for you to rest and reflect. In a couple moments, you're going to be hearing from our staff who've worked with young people this year. And maybe you'll hear a little of yourselves in their answers, or maybe you'll even get inspired, or maybe if you're like me, you'll even laugh and cry along with us. So today, we're going to ask our staff these three questions. Number one, what's something that has been challenging for you about 2021? Number two, what is something hopeful you've seen in youth ministry this year? And number three, what's something encouraging you want to share?
That's right. And at the end of the episode, we'll be getting a very special benediction or blessing from the one and only Steve Argue. So stay tuned. You don't want to miss this. We have a great example of naming difficult emotions and situations in the Bible through lament. And many churches and many youth ministers have made space for this. But sometimes when you're trying to survive and, stay afloat and meet all the expectations, there's no time for reflection or for lamenting. Sometimes just naming something really helps. So one of the questions that we asked our staff is, what is something that was hard or challenging for you personally about 2021? And this is what we heard from them.
The first thing that comes to mind is that I spent the first half of 2021 in the local church as a youth pastor.
Jen Bradbury shared some of the challenges she faced in the early part of 2021. Here's Jen.
And there were so many things that were hard about that season, ranging from everybody wanted to engage, but nobody wanted to engage in the same way. So figuring out how to actually make things happen in a way that worked for the most people. And sometimes not even for the most people, but for the people who needed the engagement the most was super, super challenging. So it was super hard in every way.
We heard similar things from many of the youth pastors we work with at FYI. Here is Zach Ellis to share more.
We talked to hundreds of church leaders. Every single one of them says this has been the hardest year in ministry they've ever had. And they were telling us this 6 months ago. And now when we talk to them, they're telling us it hasn't gotten any easier over the past year. A lot of churches are at about 60% capacity. We hear that often, 60% of what they were before the pandemic. They're still trying to figure out how to balance their work and their home life and safety of the congregation. And on top of it all, they're dealing with an increase in mental health and anxiety, not only with themselves, but with the people that they serve. This has been a recipe for burnout, a recipe for anxiety, and it has been really, really tough. And so if this is where you are at, you are not alone.
Jane Hong Guzman de Leon coached leaders for one of our research projects this past year. Here are some of her observations.
So when we started, it started right before the pandemic. And we're all excited. We're like, yes, we're going to transform ministries. It's going to be great. And then the pandemic hit, and youth pastors were really wrestling with so much. Like, I think not just COVID, but really during the cries of justice and help in regards to race and systems of racism. Man, I think the youth, they're ready to have those conversations. I had one church who their junior hires, I'm talking sixth and seventh graders, they're middle schoolers, wanted to talk about it. They had questions. And so he just created safe spaces for them to learn together. And I think that's something that I've heard again and again, that as youth leaders were hit with difficult challenges, it's like, now we're all on Zoom. Now everybody's tired of Zoom. Like, we want programs. We don't want programs. We want games. We don't want games, Just the youth leaders' ability to listen and really take into consideration what their people are saying and then do something about it, right? Create spaces where they could talk about race, create spaces where they could talk about mental health. Those are the top two things I've heard that youth and youth leaders are really dealing with in regards to just their youth ministry.
Many of our staff members are also volunteers in youth ministries. Several of them spoke to the challenges that their own churches faced this year. Here's Lisa Hanley.
Something that was really hard about this year was kind of the roller coaster of feeling like things were getting better and then they got hard again, or feeling hopeful about certain things and then it got discouraging again. And so just riding those waves was really hard and really tiring. And the second thing was knowing I didn't have as much bandwidth to reach out to students as I wanted. I'm still a volunteer in our high school youth ministry. And I wanted to meet up with them and follow up and text and do all of that more than I could. I have my limits too. And we lost 4 out of 6 volunteers in the last 2 years. 3 of them moved away during the pandemic and 1 had to step down because of health issues. So it's not because of anything with the ministry. It's just people, are leaving. And it's harder than ever to recruit. And so we're down to just like 2 volunteers and our youth leader. And one of the other volunteers also has major health issues right now. And so I can't care for all of our students. I have limits. And I think that's just been hard to know that we can't reach out to everybody. And so even though I do my best, it's just hard.
John Kwok shared a similar experience.
At least personally for my church, we don't have a youth pastor, so it's all volunteers. Right during the pandemic, like most other churches, we either lost a lot of those volunteers out of, fear of COVID, or we couldn't physically meet at our church. Yeah, that was rough. Just missing out on that kind of interpersonal relationships with youth kids. I mean, it was just terrible. Even though we've been meeting back in person, things still haven't changed. A lot of parents are still hesitant to bring their kids. A lot of volunteers have realized, maybe this is not for me anymore. Yeah, it's been really rough.
Brad Griffin shared about the hopes that he had for 2021 a year ago.
Going into 2021, a lot of us thought, well, at least it's not 2020. It can only go up from here. And, this is going to be a big turnaround. We just had so many hopes. And the further and further we got into 2021, we realized it was its own kind of 2020. It just wasn't what we thought. And as we're wrapping up the year, I think those disappointments and frustrations and exhaustion are just all catching up to us. And I know in our youth ministry, just every month we had to rethink something about youth ministry again. It wore on all of us. And I know there was a sense, and I felt a sense personally, of just inadequacy, of, not really ever knowing if we were doing the right things, of not knowing what was helpful. And that just sort of haunted me all through 2021. I know it haunted our ministry leaders and volunteers, of just never really knowing, are we doing what we need to do? Are we paying attention to the right things? And I think this year more than ever, it was a complicated question.
Several FYI staffers are also parents, and some of them spoke to the challenges they faced in that role. Here's Jake Mulder reflecting on the isolation that 2021 continued to bring.
Yeah, I can certainly speak to some of what's been hard for me personally in 2021. And interestingly, it's similar to what was hard in 2020 and we thought was going to be over. For my wife, Lauren, and I, we have kids who are ages 4 and 7. I feel like part of the way that you make it as a young family is by having others to journey with, whether that's family, whether that's friends, whether that's other families who have kids who are in a similar age bracket. And in 2021, that just really was not possible in the way that it was before, when you're asking questions about, is it safe for us to be with them? What's the environment going to be? It just made journeying together that much more difficult, even for a good chunk of our kids' school year. You don't know the other students, you don't know the teachers, just all of that isolation, disconnection as a family would be hardest part for us.
Rachel Dodd has slightly older children, and she describes how the ongoing uncertainty made things difficult.
So much about parenting is routine, right? Or establishing routine. And man, it is impossible to establish routines these days. And, when guidelines are changing, when the way schools meet are changing, when the way church does things is changing, and we're constantly adapting on the fly and just trying to figure out what is safe for our kids, what is safe for others' kids. My daughter's youth pastor she's got a kid in elementary school, middle school, and college. I see her all the time, adapting on the fly, changing things around so she can be home for a kid because they're sick or because they've been exposed and need to quarantine. Yeah, it's hard. Parenting is hard in this season. So shout out to parents, shout out to moms in ministry. You're doing amazing, amazing things and just such a blessing for our kids.
Carol Powell got permission from her daughter to share this, and here she is, telling us about something that's been challenging for her.
The toughest thing for me personally about 2021 wasn't something that directly happened to me, but it happened, or really continues to happen, with our 19-year-old Krista. She started college in late August, and she's an off-the-chart extrovert, and we knew that she would love college. The first semester of college has had a lot of bumps for Krista, almost all of which are outside of her control, and most of which have been physical. She got a concussion. She was in the hospital with pneumonia for a week. It's been a hard slog for her. And as a mom, it's just been so hard to see her struggling and journeying through kind of a desert season when we thought it was going to be a really wonderful, flourishing season.
As we close out this time of lament, we'll end with a few personal reflections. Here's Aaron Yanni.
Being alone, as opposed to like a healthy spiritual discipline of solitude, I think just like being alone and loneliness is the opposite of the best of church. And I think over the past 2 years in my life, there has been an increase in being alone. And I'm the sort of person that before the pandemic, even if I didn't have plans with people, I would surround myself with human beings. So I'd like be at a coffee shop or be at a restaurant or be out. Like I just liked the presence of others, even if we weren't like interacting, just the human presence. And I think regardless of how you've navigated the pandemic, the degree to which you feel or have the presence of others in your life has gone down. No matter your situation, we've probably done less of that. I know for me, the decrease of physical human presence in my life was incredibly difficult, yeah.
Caleb Bruce took some time to reflect on his own expectations for himself.
I think for me, one of the hardest things about 2021, in addition to a lot of loss, a lot of instability, constant change, has actually been just not meeting my own expectations for myself, whether that's spiritually or academically or professionally, just feeling like this repetitive feeling of coming up short. While there's that feels really difficult about having those feelings, I've also sensed an invitation from God in that I feel like God is saying, inviting me to be more human, to embrace my humanity, that God doesn't actually resent my humanity. He created it. It's what we're meant to be. We're all meant to be human. And that as leaders, we can strive to be sometimes more than human, which actually is not what God designed us to be. We don't need to be there for everybody at all times, have all the answers, be able to fix everybody's problems. That's not what God has called us to. He's called us to be human and to walk with other humans in this life. I honestly think that's what ministry is just be human and journey with other humans.
What about you, Gio? What's been challenging for you in 2021?
For me, the personal and the ministry are blended in, and that's what made it difficult. One of the hardest or most difficult things about 2021 was looking at my students, and I know that they're going through a lot, but also realizing that I'm going through a lot, and being present with them was kind of difficult. I had lost 19 people through COVID, and my students weren't showing up to Zoom eventually because they were burnt out. It was so hard for me not to take it personally. I kind of thought like, okay, I guess this must be a me thing. I started to question myself, my abilities. And so I think that was the thing that was very challenging for me. But I think what helped me survive was to realize, like, my students can handle me being just me. And so that's what I did. On Sundays, I would confess the times where I just was not feeling my right self, so to speak, or times when I lost somebody to COVID and that I'm grieving. For me and for them, being able to grieve together, it was actually a blessing, because like you said, Rosalind, earlier, in terms of lament, there's something powerful actually about lamenting together, even if it's not lamenting the same things. We've all experienced loss, and I do these things at church called lows and highs. That's where we get to name those losses as well as to name the good things. Which is why we asked this question: what have you noticed that was good about the things youth leaders did this year?
This time of year, we're looking back at what we created and what blog posts and social media posts that youth leaders really loved. And we learned some cool things about you, our listeners.
We'll start with something encouraging that Rachel Dodd discovered as she was looking back over some of our work from the past year.
FYI's listeners and readers are leaders who want to listen well. I just think that's so beautiful. We say this at FYI all the time, that leadership begins with listening. And I always found that the things that I did in youth ministry were so much more meaningful and connecting when it began with listening to my young people. I get so excited that we get to create more and more resources that help you do that.
We create all of those resources out of the many research projects that we conduct here at FYI. John Kwok found support in some of our older research at FYI.
I actually think about one of our oldest materials, which is Sticky Faith, and the 5-to-1 ratio of mentoring. To know that what's most important is building the relationships, to be able to support a youth who is feeling anxious. And I think that's the thing that gives me the most hope too, is that they're still reaching out to us. It may not be all of them, but for the few, that gives me a lot of hope. I think it's really easy to compare statistics from last year or a couple years ago and then just feeling depressed or in a little despair. But I see a lot of hope in people being flexible and being able to adapt to new strategies.
As John mentioned, there have been some tough statistics that have come out this year, but believe it or not, there are also inspiring ones. Leave it to Kara Powell to find it for us. Here is Kara sharing one of the stats that she found promising.
I've really come to appreciate the findings from the Springtide Research Institute, and they recently released a study that looked at how young people were feeling about relationships as we are somewhat moving out of the pandemic. And this is so encouraging to me that 70% of teenagers in the US are more open to meaningful relationships now with adults. So this has been such a tough 18 months, such a challenging season. We've all felt isolated, distant from each other. But here's the good news, is that young people today are more open to relationship with caring adults. I feel like this is an important, maybe even divine window for us to better love and serve teenagers and 20-somethings.
Beyond all the research we do here at FYI, we communicate with hundreds of pastors every year as part of our training and coaching. And Jake Mulder shares some insight about what he's observed in all that work over this past year.
If I were to offer just a little bit of hope or what might be working as encouragement here at the end of 2021, it would really be to make sure, even if you've tried to lean into, to entrust, empower teenagers in your ministry, to try and to try again. I've heard stories from a number of other youth leaders about the times that they've done that, even when they were about ready to give up. And they said, okay, just one more time. I'm going to make the effort. I'm going to get one or two teenagers, maybe it's a group, together and figure out what it looks like for them to lead. Often that has been the time that they find a breakthrough, that the students do catch on, that they do catch a vision or have an idea. And often it's those ideas that are propelling those ministries forward.
Andy Jung was inspired by youth ministers who are striving for a healthy approach to ministry.
What I love is that you want healthy ministries and healthy self. That's what encourages me, is that even in the midst of all of this, that our youth leaders are still making such an effort to be everything that they can be, and to create a ministry that will help young people to discover Christ and to love and serve Christ in this season.
Before we close out this segment, we wanted to highlight a few specific examples of great things we've seen this year. Here's a story about one church's unique approach to connecting with young adults from Zach Ellis.
One of the churches that I have worked with, they realized the pandemic really exposed this rift between young people and older people in the congregation. It was already there, but the pandemic brought out a lot of this. And so what they did was they listened really well to young people, and they started matching young people with older people. And over the several months, the older staff members and these young people built really solid relationships. So they took advantage of this opportunity. They took advantage of what the pandemic offered and set a new normal where staff members knew young people, older generations knew young people, instead of just going back to normal. It's a really unique time where everybody's kind of discovering what life is going to be like in the future. Everybody's discovering that together. So it's a really unique time to bring people together so that they can grow closer to each other, closer to God, and not further apart in this time.
And here is a story that even involves Zoom, shared by Jane.
From one youth pastor, I heard just how she had a really talented student who was really into like art and painting. That student hosted a painting night through Zoom, kind of like, like I'm going to model it for you and you follow along with me. And that just even led to more opportunities for the youth to do lamenting through art. I saw beautiful partnerships where the youth pastors didn't have to come up with everything themselves, but they were just listening to their kids and then just thinking of like, well, what can we do together to talk about these things and create safe spaces?
Tyler Greenway has a story about one church's innovative use of a food pantry.
This particular church started a food pantry, and it was largely led by young people. And they started the food pantry because there was need in their community. And on top of that, they've had some young people who are even going above and beyond. Some of the young people have started like making food from the food pantry and bringing it out to people who are homeless right now. It's been fun visiting these different sites for one of our research projects and just hearing about stories of youth leaders staying connected, encouraging their young people, and young people doing the same to each other and for youth leaders.
Our last story is from Brad Griffin.
So one of the things I did this year in my role at FYI was coach a few leaders. I worked with one person in particular, one leader in particular named Lindsay, and she was so inspiring to me throughout this year, the way that she kept listening and kept asking questions. She was asking questions of the young people in her ministry, asking questions of parents, asking questions of other leaders. And she just faithfully was listening and leaning in and adapting along the way. And that was hard and that was tiring. And she just kept at it. And I was so inspired by Lindsay and other leaders like Lindsay who just kept listening.
To wrap up this segment, we'll hear from Lisa Hanley. And yes, it's about prayer. We youth leaders need to close things out in prayer, right?
Monthly, we have these prayer meetings, and we invite leaders from all over the country across different denominations and organizations, and we pray for youth leaders and young people and the church. And I've sat in meetings with 15 leaders from 15 denominations and, a wide range, but we're all unified by this common heart for young people and youth leaders. And it's been a really refreshing and powerful thing to just come together and pray.
And these leaders are praying for you and the work you're doing. Rosalind, what about you? What have you been encouraged by this year?
There's something that the pandemic has forced everyone to do. It has forced us to acknowledge our vulnerability and our limits and the limits of programming. But the good news about that is that Jesus didn't have programs. Jesus had relationships. And a lot of what we've had to do during the pandemic is to learn how to foster those relationships with our students and with the people around us when so much of the way that we used to live is no longer accessible. I really see how youth leaders really stepped up and kind of realized this very early on, okay, we can't do the programs that we used to do. How do I keep in touch with my kids? So the last question we asked our staff was, what is a short piece of encouragement that you'd like to give youth ministers? And we heard so many great things that we just would love to share with you. You're going to hear a lot of voices from FYI in this section. We wanted you to hear this multi-voiced chorus of encouragement from us to you as we close out this year together.
Youth leaders, know that God cares for you, that God loves you. What you do matters. We love you and we care about you.
Even though this is probably one of the more difficult times to be in ministry, I think the church is still having a big impact on young people, and young people still love and need the church.
We've heard in 2021 that what students need more than anything is belonging. And we've heard that youth leaders like you have created those spaces for them. So on behalf of the Fuller Youth Institute, I just want to say thank you for leading in and creating those spaces for students to be known and connect.
Youth leader, this is what I would tell you. Caring for yourself and your own mental health needs is not disregarding your youth or the ministry that you have at hand. I feel like it goes hand in hand. As your youth are dealing with pain and frustrations and questioning, it's okay for you to do that too. And if anything, it helps you to wholeheartedly enter into ministry. I feel like there's so much even grace and openness with the youth. I feel like they want real talk. Yeah, I would encourage you to be yourself and don't run away from the things that also concern your heart, but think about how can you do it together with the youth? How can you lament together with the youth? How can you cry out for hope together with the youth? How can you find ways of doing justice together with the youth? In that way, you'll find ministry to even be more compelling. That is my word of encouragement.
I think it's really easy for you to feel like you're not doing enough or that you simply aren't enough. And my encouragement to you would be, often your presence is all a young person needs. Simply being there is enough.
One encouragement I'll pass on is actually from our Young People's Council. One of my favorite parts of my job is we have a council of teenagers who are all 16 to 20, and we have these great conversations with them, and often we'll ask, what has been meaningful in your experience of youth ministry, or what do you want church leaders to hear? And again, they just want people to be real and to be honest, and they want the space to be real and honest and to bring their authentic selves. And I find it so encouraging that they're not looking for perfection. They're not looking for us to be polished. They're not looking for more stuff. They're just looking for real relationship and connection. And for me, that takes off some of the pressure. And so I hope it does for youth leaders too, that just showing up is a huge, huge win.
I want youth leaders to know that your care for teenagers matters more than you think. Even when it's discouraging, even when kids don't show up, even when you don't get a lot of response, or the response is a blank face and you're not sure if anything is sinking in. Being an adult who shows up in the life of a young person consistently, it's everything.
In my own family, my daughter is in middle school, and she's asking all the questions about who she is, where she belongs, what her purpose is. And I am so thankful for our church ministry team for being there, for adapting on the fly, for just remembering that she still needs those leaders, those people to speak just encouragement and truth into her life, and figuring out how we do that in this changing time. We're so thankful for all that you do, and keep going.
Yeah, I think my encouragement is to hang in there, to know that you are doing really good work. And not only are you doing really good work, but it's really important work. And it might feel like no one notices that. And it might feel like it's doing no good right now when no one is showing up and everyone is complaining. But trust that God is going to use it in ways that you might not even have a glimpse of right in this moment.
As our 19-year-old has had some good times in college, but a lot of hard times in her first semester of college, I've talked with her about Romans 5:3-4. And honestly, this is one of my least favorite verses in the New Testament, which I know is a little heretical for a theology faculty member to say. But here's what Paul writes. Paul writes that suffering leads to perseverance, perseverance to character, and character hope. And I want character and hope for myself, for my own kids, for young people generally, without the suffering. And yet so often God uses these challenging times to draw us into deeper relationship with God and with each other. And I will say that's true for our daughter. She is closer to God. She would be the first to say she's closer to God now than when she started college a few months ago. It's been hard, but she has grown in her faith.
This is something that is really important for us to think about you as a leader and to think about your resilience in ministry. So for our upcoming season, we're going to focus on resilience in ministry. So stay tuned, that will be coming up sometime in the new year.
If you signed up for our email list, we have a Leader Care email coming to you at the end of the year. This list also receives free articles every Monday, so sign up today. Go to fulleryouthInstitute.org/subscribe. Or we'll also link it in our show notes where you can find it as well.
For any more content, you can also follow us on your favorite social media platform. And now, to wrap up this episode, here is Steve Argue with a blessing for us.
Hey, ministry friends, do you remember the New Year's resolutions you made in January? It doesn't matter, because from our point of view, you've blown those goals away. Think about what you've accomplished in this last year. You've become YouTube sensations, setting personal video posting records. Because of Zoom, let's just call you legit multi-site. pastors. You've become better public health spokespeople, triage decision makers, on-call mentors, community organizers, and have acquired more innovation skills than all the chefs who get the 3 random ingredients on the Food Network's Chopped. Not bad. Not bad at all. And more importantly, you have stepped in to hold the space with young people. You've stepped into the tension and the confusion and the pain and the loss and the anxiety and the beauty and the unknown to join with them and advocate for them. This world is better because you've hung in there and you've shown up. When others have taken a step back, you have leaned in. And you're still here, still offering glimmers of good news that young people long to see. And we see you, we love you, we need you, we are with you. And so as this season wraps up, may you find rest. May you give yourself permission to reset. May you fall in love with God and others all over again. And may you know God's grace and peace. Cheers.
I don't even know how to encourage. Like, I don't even know what I would say for my encouragement. Because for me, like, this is going to sound so stupid, but sometimes I practice lines that characters say because they're like empowering lines, you know? So like, for example, have you seen the movie Taken?
Yeah.
So in the movie Taken, like, I love that because, like, to me, it's like I'm looking at the pandemic straight at my face, and I'm gonna be like, if you're looking for a ransom, I can tell you I don't have money, but what I do have are a very particular set of skills I've acquired over a very long career, aka my ministry career, right? Skills that make me a nightmare for people like you, pandemic. You know, so like sometimes I practice that, and that kind of encourages me to like go forward.
That's fun.
But that sounds ridiculous, I know, but it's what I do because I think sometimes as pastors we forget to learn to play. Like that. Like people take us so seriously, or we take ourselves so seriously, that sometimes we forget that we serve a God of fun. You know, God's a fun God too, and he's hilarious, so we could be hilarious. So yeah, sometimes I do that.